All right, guys, we're back with Daily Exchange. We're here with Simon from Loki, who's the project lead, and we're talking about everything about privacy coins. Someone, you want to tell us first, what is Loki and what does it do?
Sure. So Loki is a fork of Monero, and we're essentially using that fork of Monero to create a self-regulating onion routing network that we can also send private messages over. So Loki's kind of a suite of a few different things that are coming together in a synergistic way to produce something that's greater than the sum of their parts. So we're using a number of technologies: onion routing, and yet end-to-end encryption, asynchronous storage on a decentralized network, and of course a CryptoNote style cryptocurrency to create a full suite of tools that people can use to transact and communicate online anonymously.
Okay, and what are some of the main sort of use cases that you're seeing with Loki right now?
Right now with Loki, we've been running as a private cryptocurrency for the last year. Actually, it would have been a year and a week from today, which is pretty exciting. And we have a test network for the onion routing network, which can be used to access anonymous websites. We also have like a sort of closed beta of the messenger going at the moment as well. But towards the end of this year, all of that should be out and people will be able to use it to access the internet without revealing their IP address, communicate with their friends, family, business partners, and so on, using end-to-end encryption and onion routing, which will allow them to do that in such a way where I can send you a message without no one knowing the contents of the message or even that the message was sent, because we use a number of technologies to obfuscate the path that messages take, where they, who they go to, the IP addresses that they're sent from, and so forth. There's no phone numbers, there's no anything like that. So there's lots of use cases with sort of an open communications platform, an internet anonymization service, and an anonymous cryptocurrency as well. So there's quite a few things that it can be used for. Whether you're in business doing confidential transactions, security is extremely important. If you're a journalist overseas and you're concerned about your security and your safety, obviously a big thing. Or even if you just want to talk to your loved ones in a private place. I think private places on the internet are becoming harder and harder to find, with the increasing surveillance that we see on Google, Facebook, and so forth. It's actually quite difficult to go somewhere where other people are, that you can actually talk as if you were in a park somewhere where no one can hear you. So we're trying to replicate private spaces on the internet, because I think since the mid-2000s there hasn't really been a whole lot of options there. There's been increasing developments in secure technologies, which has been really exciting, and we're hoping to help advance that.
Now, Loki uses crypto notes similar to Monero, and there's been some recent potential vulnerabilities with crypto notes. Is Loki susceptible to those vulnerabilities?
Yeah, that's right. So we're a direct fork of Monero essentially, and so we take all of the upstream changes, we push back some useful changes to Monero as well. So we're very intertwined in this CryptoNote ecosystem. And the paper that was released recently regarding the de-anonymization attack is actually, in my opinion, it's got not a lot to do with the fundamental structure of CryptoNote itself, but the fee structure that Monero implemented after the bulletproof fork. Because it's so cheap to make transactions now, it's very easy to flood the network. And obviously when you have a system that uses ring signatures to obfuscate your transaction history, you can de-anonymize the network like that. But that's a fee structure problem. Any sort of spam attack is currently possible on Monero because it's so cheap to make those sort of transactions. And it's also quite cheap on Loki. We haven't seen any practical examples of this being done. It would be very, very obvious if it was being done, because you would see hundreds or thousands of transactions being included, every hour or so. Yes. You'd have to get a large percentage of the transaction pool as an attacker in order to perform this de-anonymization attack. And as far as we can tell, in both Monero and Loki, this is just not happening. So this is a theoretical attack that can easily be fixed by increasing the fees. So, it's really a trade-off between how cheap do you want to make the network and how spam-proof do you want to make it. So and that's a balancing act that every blockchain has to choose from as well. It's just unfortunate that with a spam attack, you can also perform a de-anonymization attack with this particular design.
What are the main differences between other privacy coins and Loki?
So Loki, I guess, our primary focus is not the privacy currency aspect. We're actually going far beyond that and using it as a self-regulating tool for an onion routing network and storage network, so we can do a whole bunch of other stuff. But as far as Loki and Monero go, in comparison to other privacy coins out there, we are on the CryptoNote protocol, which is a system that uses a number of different obfuscation and encryption techniques to anonymize transactions. So we use ring signatures, which sort of are a way to tell people a bunch of outputs and then you are one of them, but no one knows which one you are. We also use bulletproofs to hide transaction amounts. We also use stealth addresses, so there's no way to link transactions between addresses. So there's a few different techniques there. Other ones like zero-knowledge proofs is another method that you can use to prove that you sent money without revealing anything about that transaction, using some really new and really interesting cryptography. There's some questions about, it's always evolving. Zero-knowledge proofs are quite a new thing. Zcash is not that old, and there's been some major vulnerabilities there as well. There's also the Zero Cash protocol, which differs slightly, but a kind of similar idea. And then there's Mimblewimble, which has come out also very recently, which seems to be a very elegant solution in my opinion. But again, teething issues with the interactive transaction process. So when you have privacy on a blockchain, there's really, it's a question of trade-offs. Like what are you willing to sacrifice? Because you have new encryption schemes that are relatively untested. You have older encryption schemes that are tested but slower or bigger, or there's a number of trade-offs that have to be made. So it's a constantly evolving space. It's very interesting to follow, and there's a bunch of resources online to learn more about them. And I would strongly recommend that if anyone finds this interesting, there's a lot of reading to do. There's a lot of papers to read if this is something that floats your boat.
Okay, and so why is privacy important these days? And I guess how is Loki helping that?
I think privacy is really important these days because it's so hard to come by on the internet. When we look on our phones or on our desktops or whatever, when we connect to the internet in general, by default, it's viewable by a very large number of organizations and people, whether that be Google, your internet service provider, the government in the jurisdiction in which you live. There's a lot of places that you can go and be fully exposed in a lot of senses. So because the digital world has become such an inherent part of our lives now, and we have always depended on private spaces in order to conduct business, to build relationships and so forth, I think it's really important that we're also able to have public and private spaces on the internet where people can go. I think it really speaks to freedom of speech, freedom of the press and so forth, that technology is created and enabled. So,
and there's been, I guess, some recent controversy around, privacy, and some governments are concerned about, the uses of those coins. Do you think there's actually, any nefarious activities that are taking place with these?
Oh, certainly. But there's nefarious activities happening with the US dollar. I mean, just because it's private, it doesn't mean that it is inherently bad. The US dollar note, like the physical cash, is used for drug deals every day, everywhere. So it's, the argument that anonymous currency is a bad thing is just incorrect, because I think many, many people around the world realize the inherent value of cash systems, and the anonymization of cryptocurrencies is just a way to digitize that process. It's the same properties. So I think governments will be quite nervous and have expressed concern over the fact that they can't see everyone's transactions. That's been the case previously. And then the credit card system sort of came to be. Now they have the ability to see anyone's transactions wherever they are, and they don't want to lose that power again. So I think, there's obviously, it might be perceived as a threat, but in reality it's just returning back to the way things were before the early 2000s. So,
in terms of privacy, do you think that the market for privacy, or like the demand for it, is started to increase, or where do you think the market of privacy is going?
Oh, absolutely. I think if you look at companies like Apple, for instance, they've clearly identified that privacy is a big concern for consumers, and consumers are really waking up to the fact that things that they say online, whether or not it's in a direct message, is very visible. So you've seen Apple do this big marketing campaign about how the iPhone is centered around privacy and stuff, even though that's very difficult to verify, and there's a number of issues with that. But I definitely think that in terms of the consumer market, there is definitely a desire for it, but not a lot of understanding for it. So I think there's still a lot of education that needs to happen around encryption schemes and that sort of thing to really get people on board with how they can actually be secure online. But yeah, I mean, Tor has been around for well over a decade now, and that's probably the biggest network that we can look to at the moment of an anonymization network that's run by random people, or even Bitcoin is perhaps another example of a peer-to-peer network that's used to do things outside of the mainstream. And yeah, so there's definitely demand for it. I just think there needs to be more discussion about how it works and what people should be thinking about when they choose what platforms they use, and how they talk to the people that they care about.
Why do you think I guess people are so fascinated by privacy? The cypherpunk movement in the beginning, and I guess a lot of things have spawned from that. Why do you think this came about?
I think as many generations have come and gone, I think that the cypherpunks, the internet security phase, is almost like a counterculture that's appeared. Like you have the dominant forms of internet usage, and then you have this counterculture that's like, no, we want to be free and open and secure and private and all of these other properties. And I think the other reason it's become so popular for the type of people that cypherpunks are is because it's such an interesting space. It's so deeply intellectual and yet so elegant when you come to understand it, or are able to join a system that has these properties. I mean, I think what grabs people's attention about Bitcoin is that it definitely falls within this category of this really elegant system that enables this decentralized global money. And I think that certainly captured my imagination when I first came across it. And I think a lot of people in the crypto space are in the exact same boat.
Yeah. In terms of, I guess, cryptography and, people, I guess, being hacked these days and security and concerns, do you think this is going to increase again in the future? Like in terms of outlook, where does Loki sit in terms of when this will be really, really mainstream, that people really want to get, that's what if it's not private, then they're not going to use it. Do you think, I've heard some people talk about the darknet becoming actually the main internet versus the current internet, which is kind of maybe a bit insecure?
Yeah.
What's sort of your vision and outlook on that?
I actually don't think that a darknet will become the main form of the internet, primarily because the user experience is going to be inherently worse. It's going to be slower. It just is. It always is going to be slower. When you want privacy, you're trading off speed most of the time, and maybe we get to the point where internet speeds, latency, and computing power is just that great that it doesn't matter anymore, and that would be fantastic. But in the current paradigm, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. However, I do think that Web 2 technologies, or Web 2, I don't really like that thing, but that's what they call it, are definitely going in a more secure direction. For example, HTTPS is now prolific. You can't go anywhere on the internet without using it, which is really great because it means the web server that you're talking to encrypts the traffic such that everyone in between can't actually see the content of the web pages that you're being served. So whether that's your bank or your Facebook feed, your ISP can't see it, but they know that you're connecting and they know that you're talking. So there's still a lot of privacy concerns there. But I definitely think that when options are available for near perfect anonymity with very few trade-offs for user experience, I don't see why people wouldn't desire that over existing platforms. So, WhatsApp and Signal are great, but it requires your phone number, and that turns a lot of people off for using it as a secure messaging platform. Whereas systems like Loki, in opposition to that, do not require your phone number. they mask your IP address and they store the messages on a decentralized system in such a way that no one can really work out the path of the messages, especially if we add in a high latency option to the mixnet as well. So I think if we are able to do this in such a way that the user experience is friendly, then mainstream users will definitely be able to understand and use systems that provide them a greater degree of anonymity. But at the moment, things are still being rolled out, things are still in development always, and for what I consider to be such an important technology, very few people are working in this sort of space with encrypted messaging, onion routing, and so forth. It's actually a very small developer community.
Now, Loki has some really interesting tokenomics in terms of its I guess inflation. Can you tell everyone sort of how that works and how that breaks down?
Yeah, so we don't have a fixed supply. It will continue into infinity. We did a really long study. We engaged an economist to help us with this to understand the macroeconomics behind it. And excuse me. Because we have this system of staking which enables service nodes to exist, who effectively run the network, and we need a large number of them to exist, and we also gain some Sybil resistance in theory from that as well, because it becomes very difficult for a third party to come in and take over a large part of the network if they have to stake in order to join it. There's a cost associated with it, and there's a limit to which they can achieve that as well. So we've had to do some real challenging design around that. And so effectively, we needed to work out a nice curve that would create a growing number of nodes over time, whilst also not exceeding the cost of running them in terms of rewards. So, for example, if it only costs you like $1,000 to stake a node, but it costs you $40 a month to run it, and you were earning like 5% return, that probably wouldn't be worth your money, because if you're paying $40 a month and getting 5% a year, the cost of running is going to exceed the reward. So obviously you're going to end up with less nodes. So we had to do a really long design process, and we wrote a whole paper about it, which is available on our website. I think the link would be loki.network/proposal, but I'll check that. And if you're interested in token economics, I think it's a good read.
Yeah. And I guess this idea of an unlimited supply is quite interesting, and I guess it's a form of inflation. But I have seen some comparables with the Loki release and Bitcoin. And did you guys take some inspiration from other coins to come to your
Yeah,
economics?
definitely. So we've known about Bitcoin for a long time. Where we looked at Ethereum, we looked at the way Grin is doing it with the 1 token per second. Is actually a pretty interesting idea about how you can create a slowing curve. This notion that cryptocurrency is a deflationary asset, though, is just wrong. It's not correct. There is so much inflation happening even on Bitcoin right now. It's not funny.
Why is that?
Because new coins are being created right now. So that is inherently inflationary, where the supply increases. Although if you talk to, we have an economist on the board of our foundation, he does not like the word inflation, but I think we as a cryptocurrency community have come to understand a different meaning of inflation. But anyway, that's an aside. Essentially, if we have a block reward where it's not fee-based, the supply is increasing. So the notion that there is limited supply is not exactly true. It is in the case of Bitcoin, because it eventually stops, but that is not necessarily a good thing. We don't know what will happen after that, whether enough security is going to be provided by the transaction fees in order for the security of the network to be maintained. And in our particular case, it is completely necessary that there is some method of deriving value from running a service node. So we always need rewards to be included so that that can be distributed out. What we developed as well, though, is a system where tokens can also be burned through usage. So we have this thing called the Loki name system. So instead of having a hexadecimal string representing who you are on the network, whether that's for payments, for the messenger, for the website address on LokiNet, you can instead create a transaction on the blockchain and claim a name and associate various strings with that, so that I can be Simon.network, for example, or you can have Finder.Loki, for example.
That's cool.
And so people can send you money to that address, they can send you messages to that address, and they can also access your internal website using that address as well. And so by doing that transaction, you're actually burning tokens. So that's offsetting the inflation that is happening on the reward side. So if you get sufficient usage, and sufficient purchasing of these names and trading of these names, then that could help to offset the inflation as well. So it's a supply and demand thing, and where the supply is always increasing, there has to be demand to offset that. Otherwise, the price will go down.
Yep.
That's just the way it works. Yep. And just an aside to this as well, people that say that hash rate influences the price are so wrong. They're just really wrong. I really want to make that in all of the assessment we did.
Why does hash rate not determine price?
Because profitability determines hash rate. So whatever the price is, whatever the demand is, if the price goes up, then the assumption is that not the assumption, in practice, the profitability goes up and then the hash rate follows, and then vice versa. So whatever the hash rate is on any coin that you're looking at is a function of the current price and the current emission. That's it. Hash rate is not a useful metric when you're looking at a market, unless there is some sort of attack going on, or unless there is some sort of ASIC entering the network or something like that. That might indicate that a large player is coming in. But the emission doesn't change. So the same amount of coins are getting created every day, regardless of the hash rate.
And I guess in that circumstance, difficulty will be changing as well.
Correct.
Is there do you have a similar mechanic with Loki? Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So difficulty is the method by which you can keep the same emission rate whilst having a changing hash rate. That's the whole point of difficulty. So if more hash rate comes on, the difficulty goes up, and then the rate of coin creation is kept at the same pace all the time. So this is why hash rate has no function on the price, because the price actually determines the value of the emission each day, and then that will have an effect as well if miners sell and so forth. But yeah.
So obviously there's a recent coin, Grin, that came out as well, and I think it's almost you guys are seen in potentially that you guys are maybe grouped together in some ways. I'm interested in your views on how you guys differ, and when you look at that project, how do you guys compare, and I guess where are you guys going in the future?
In terms of the emission scheme or just the projects in general?
I guess the project in general and what the use cases are and where you see that going.
So we actually really like Mimblewimble as an idea. When we were starting Loki, we considered it as an option, but obviously it hadn't been deployed yet, so we were pretty skeptical about it with the Monero route instead, because that's what we were familiar with. But it may be possible in the future that Monero forks and changes to the Mimblewimble protocol, which is what they use, and I find to be a very elegant system. There's a trade-off though, which is that the transactions are interactive. So if you want to send money to someone, you need to exchange information with them in order to be able to do it. In practice though, most people are just sending money to exchanges and that sort of thing anyway, so it doesn't really make too much of a difference in most cases, and they're doing a lot of work to make peer-to-peer connections easy, so that wallets can just talk to each other and do it in the background, and no one has to think about it. But if that can be worked out, then I think, and it has been worked out to a large extent, then that is probably the way forward in terms of privacy. I think zero-knowledge proofs are still very new, a lot of scalability issues, a lot of user experience issues as well, and just the fact that the anonymity set is so small. 2% of transactions on Zcash are done privately. Everything else is just like Bitcoin. It's open as hell.
Yep.
So, there's issues there. But Grin is just doing the transaction thing. Loki is much more than that. So we have the messenger, the onion routing network, the storage system, a lot of other things. So we were never really focused on the currency aspect. We were always trying to go, okay, we got this blockchain thing. What is it actually useful for? And in our case, we've found that a self-regulating network, a self-regulating onion network where we can do quality control and node authentication and all of that sort of thing, all in a decentralized fashion, is actually really, really useful.
Definitely. And in terms of, I guess, the chat app particularly, who do you think is going to be the main users of that? You've got apps like, I guess, Wicker and, Signal. There are a number else out there, but, do you guys see yourselves, in that sort of same category?
Yeah, definitely. We definitely want to compete in that category. Obviously, there's some security auditing that has to happen before we would claim that we can compete in that area. But I definitely think, in a conceptual sense anyway, Loki Messenger is primed to take on those projects, because we are able to offer a higher degree of anonymity if the assumptions about our security model are proven to be correct. So, There's no phone numbers, which is the main problem that people see with WhatsApp and Signal. There's more problems with WhatsApp, but main problem with Signal is that there is a phone number associated with it, and you're always connected to the Signal server. So there's a lot of metadata that is created and stored on the Signal servers and outside of it as well. So there's issues there. Wicker is actually not very transparent about how it works. You can do a lot of digging into figuring out how exactly the system works. And I believe a lot of it is peer-to-peer as well, which is actually not a great user experience a lot of the time. So there's, as with most things, there's a lot of trade-offs when you're talking about privacy. We try and strike a balance because we have a system of both having real-time peer-to-peer communications through a onion routing network. You get the same level of anonymity, so I can connect to you not directly, but in real time by bouncing my connection around a bunch of computers. You bounce your connection around a bunch of computers. We meet somewhere in the middle out there, and we can talk without knowing where each other are on the network, which is really cool, or anyone else. And then we can also, if you're offline, I can still send you a message by bouncing my connection through a bunch of computers, depositing it in a cluster of decentralized nodes, and then you can check your nodes and ask if they have any messages for you and retrieve it at a later date, also bouncing your connection through a bunch of nodes. So you have this method where we can mix and send messages through this network in such a way that ideally no one will even know that the messages are being sent in the first place, or at least who they're being sent to and from. It's very obscure.
Brilliant. How does the coin get used with, like, say for example, the Messenger app, or the Onion network?
So if you're using the Onion routing network or Loki Messenger, you don't even need to know the coin exists if you don't want to. However, if you do want a username, I like to think of it as a username, Simon.Loki or whatever, then you need to pay the blockchain in order to get that name recognized on the network. So that's sort of the monetization scheme here. But there's no scaling issues in terms of the blockchain with onion routing or messaging. It's all done off-chain by the nodes. They run it, and then they monitor each other, and if they are doing bad things, there's a voting system in place, and when it comes around for that node to be voted on, if the nodes around it agree that it is not doing up to standard job, then it gets booted off the network. So there's a very strong incentive there for service node operators who are paid to run these nodes to keep the standard of service up and to not do anything malicious.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Now, what's coming up, Simon? What do you want everyone to sort of know about? What's coming up with Loki?
Well, in the next few months, we're sort of towards the end of the year looking to bring out Loki Messenger on all platforms, and that's sort of when we change from our product development phase into our go-to-market strategy. So we turn from being this cool little cryptocurrency project that's just building away in the background into something that people can actually use. And so there's open betas coming out shortly. LokiNet is currently available for testing. We're really just looking for a community who's interested in what we're doing, who wants to help us build. We have a hackathon coming up shortly. We have bounty programs if you want to help contribute to the project and help us work out some of the teething issues with what we're working on. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot happening. We're a pretty big team now. We've got 20 people around the world, some here in the States, the rest back in Australia. So yeah, there's always stuff happening.
And where can people go to participate and to join?
You start at Loki.network. That's probably the best bet. That's our website. A lot of the discussion though happens on our Discord. The link's available on the website. So come in there, have a chat to us. We're always around. Just all sorts of topics and that sort of stuff we cover. If you have questions, more than welcome. If you want to check out our code bases or on GitHub, again, links on the website. We have many repositories. I would suggest starting with the Loki Network repository and having a play with that. That's the Onion router. Yeah.
Brilliant. Now we ask everyone on the show this question. Now it's not financial advice, but at the end of the year, the clock strikes 12 on New Year's Eve. What do you think of the price of Bitcoin will be in US dollars? I think we just hit. If I'm not mistaken, 7,800.
700 or something.
Yeah, 777 I saw before. So we're in a really interesting time.
Yeah.
But I'm interested in your thoughts on the market and where. But it's not financial advice, so you can answer however you want.
Not financial advice. I'm surprised about how quickly things are moving. I honestly thought we would be fairly stagnant for the rest of the year. I think my theory about how the Bitcoin market will move and the cryptocurrency market along with it, is it'll follow the same sort of cycle that it's been following the last 2 or 3 cycles, which is the Bitcoin halvening. So the halvening happens, and then roughly 6 months to a year later, usually in December, you get this big run up. So, my apologies. December 2021 is when I thought the next all-time high would be. But that's just a theory based on the previous cycles. Lots of people have had that theory, but things are moving so much faster now. I wouldn't buy now. I'm not going to buy now. I think this is definitely a fool's sucker's rally. It's moving way too fast. It's going way too euphoric, and whenever it's euphoric, I just sell. It doesn't work. It never sustains itself.
Brilliant.
Yeah, we had that peak a couple of days ago where it went up from it was like 6,000 to 7,400 in the space of, I think it was about a week. And yeah, that's what I'm talking about. That's euphoria. That's just crazy.
Yeah.
Like when you see double digits on Bitcoin in terms of percentage gain in 24 hours, be cautious.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have a price for the end of the year?
End of the year. Oh, I reckon it'll be above the previous all-time high. I reckon it'll be over 14K.
14K US?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Simon, thank you so much for joining us on Daily Exchange.
Thank you very much for having me.
Good luck with your project. Guys, it's a Daily Exchange. Check out the guys, Simon's project and the team. They're doing some great stuff. See you guys later.